Today we're talking about Jeweled Lacertas. Guys, what I have right here in our hands is called the Jeweled Lacerta, also known as the Timon lepidus. These guys are the largest of the Lacerta family, and they come from southwestern Europe, mainly Italy, Spain, Portugal, even up to France. You're gonna find these guys mainly in like scrubland, woodland areas, vineyards.
Now, there's a clear difference between the males and the females. Now, I happen to be holding a melanistic female. This is a recessive mutation on these Jeweled Lacertas, but normal females are gonna look somewhat like this big male, but they're not gonna have the size head that he does. And they're not gonna have the really bright blue spots that he does. They do have some blue coloration, but the males tend to be brighter blues and brighter greens than the females. Now, Jeweled Lacertas could get anywhere from 2 to 2.5 feet long. I've even heard of some monsters getting up to 3 feet long, but the majority of them are gonna be 2 feet long, with the males being the bigger of the two.
So these guys are a relatively affordable lizard. They're not too crazy priced. Baby normal Jeweled Lacertas unsexed start at about around $150, while the melanistics unsexed start at about $200.
These guys are super underrated. They've been around for a while, but not a lot of people have caught on to how amazing these lizards are. They could actually be super tame, and they're very, very smart. They almost remind me of like a tegu, and they're gonna recognize you. They're gonna know that you're not going to harm them. They'll actually come out to you by themselves. So I think it makes an excellent pet, especially if you're willing to put in the time to tame them down.
Speaking of the tegu, these guys are actually pretty similar in diet as well. They're mainly gonna eat insects like crickets, roaches, worms, but they also enjoy fruit just like the tegus. So you can feed them a wide variety of different fruits, especially like stuff like banana they'll like to pick on. You can even feed them crested gecko diet. I fed these guys plenty of times crested gecko diet, and they absolutely love it.
So these guys are long-lived lizards. Adult Lacertas can reach around 15, even 20 years of age. So it's a long-term commitment if you're trying to get one of these guys.
So there's two different ways you can keep Jeweled Lacertas. If you live somewhere like South Florida or the Mediterranean, you can keep these guys outdoors. The way I keep them outdoors, I do have large enclosures for them. I made these all because I am gonna keep them in groups. I'm gonna keep them in trios to even, 1.3, which is a quad. And these enclosures are 4 feet long by 2 feet wide by 2 feet high, so a lot of space for them. I put a lot of hiding spots. Since it is outside, these guys do like it a little dry, but can handle the humidity very well. I put half cypress mulch to kind of retain some humidity, and then half pea pebble so it can kind of just drain it out. So if they need a drier area, they'll just move off to the drier area. These guys do come from scrublands, so they want a lot of bushes, a lot of places to hide. So we just jam-pack these with leaves, plants, branches, hides, just stuffed it in there because that's how they like it. That's how they feel comfortable. And then I also have lay bins in there for these guys. Since it is outside, I didn't cut a top on this lid. So what I did is cut a hole in the side and put a tube in there so they can go in and out of the enclosure. The reason I didn't cut a hole in the top, as we do for most of our hides, is because when it rains here in Florida, it's just gonna flood. And if there's eggs in there and it floods, it's gonna kill the eggs. So that's why I did it like that. And then in here, I have a mixture of soil, sand. You want some kind of substrate that keeps humidity, and then you could also kind of dig a tunnel with, because these guys will dig and bury their eggs. And they actually like to chill in here all the time too. If it gets too hot, they'll escape the sun just like that. Don't need it too complicated, just bunch of stuff. Make it like a scrubland, bushland, and they'll be happy.
If you are keeping them outside, you want to make sure that you have enough shade for them, because they're not going to want to stay in the sun all the time. You don't want to have an enclosure that's out in the middle of the field where it gets full sun the whole time. So that's why they have plenty of areas to escape the sun in the enclosure, and there's obviously foliage, and trees on the outside that are going to provide some shade throughout the day. Now, if you're keeping them inside, you want to provide maybe like a 75 to 100 watt bulb that's going to provide 100 to 120 degree basking spot. Now that's going to be the basking spot, that's going to be the hottest point of that enclosure. If you have a big enough enclosure, the opposite side of that enclosure should be like in the 80s. Now one thing about Jeweled Lacertas is that they do hibernate. They go through a brumation period. During the winter months, they're gonna go basically underground, they're gonna go inside the mulch, they're gonna bury themselves, and they're gonna escape the heat. So during that time, it is okay to not feed them and to basically turn off their heat. Now, it is very important though, if you turn off the heat, you have to stop feeding them though. If you keep feeding them and there is no heat, then they're gonna have problems digesting and it could cause your animal to die. So during the winter time, like the 3 months of the winter time, you could hibernate them, you could brumate them, just make sure they have a fresh bowl of water. You could keep them in a cool 40 to 50 degree area and they're gonna do just fine. They're gonna come out, and if you're looking to breed them, that's gonna be a key for you to be able to breed these guys. Now, like keeping them outdoors, you're also gonna need a big space for them indoors. These guys will utilize all the space you could give them. They're very active lizards and they're very smart. So if you can provide a 4-foot cage indoors, then by all means do so. Most people might not be able to provide that indoors. So you could do like one of those 3-foot long cages by 18 foot, and those are gonna be adequate as well.
Big 18 feet.
18 inches.
This is a big cage.
Yeah, 18-foot cage.
Did you talk about UV?
If you are keeping them indoors, you could provide a 10.0 UVB lamp, but you have to make sure that the animal can escape that UVB. They're not gonna wanna be exposed to that UVB at all times. So it is important that you give them somewhere to escape that. If you're keeping them indoors, you could also just use mulch for the substrate.
Keep in mind when you are getting your baby Lacerta is that these guys do grow very fast. This male right here is only about a year old. So in a year, they might reach adulthood, full size. Also, if you're keeping multiple babies, be aware that the babies can be very nippy with each other. They are pretty food aggressive, though it's not that common if you keep them well fed. You know, it can happen where they'll get nip tails and sometimes even might lose a leg, but as long as you keep them well fed, they shouldn't have any issues. I keep my guys in a trio to quads all year round without any problems. But when you are cohabiting anything, it is important to keep an eye on all the animals, make sure they're all doing well. If you start seeing one animal become lethargic, weak, losing limb, you know, tail, like stuff like that, you want to remove them. So even with these guys who do good together, always want to keep an eye on every animal whenever you're cohabiting.
Now, as babies, these guys are gonna be unsexed. It's gonna be impossible to sex them. You're gonna have to grow them up. And the males, you'll tell the difference right away. They'll start to get a bigger head. They're gonna start picking up more size and that hemipenal bulge that you see at the bottom of this guy. Now, it's time to put this guy back. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you so much. And don't forget to subscribe.